Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 7th webinar in NAPSA series entitled NAPSA Presents Experience from the Field. My name is Andy Gray, and I'm the director of the North American Primate Sanctuary Alliance. NAPSA is a coalition of the leading accredited primate sanctuaries on the continent who collectively care for close to 800 apes, monkeys, and lemurs, all rescued and retired from biomedical research, the entertainment industry, and the pet trade. Since our in-person NAPSA workshops only happen every other year, we're always thinking about ways to keep that same spirit of collaboration and knowledge sharing going in between our gatherings. And the Experience from the Field webinar really grew out of that idea, creating a way for sanctuary professionals and advocates to share practical lessons and real-world experience with one another, even when we're not all together in the same room. But before we get started, just a quick note that today is the first time we're live streaming one of these webinars on YouTube in addition to Facebook. And we're really excited to make the series more accessible to a wider audience, but we just want to thank you in advance for your patience if we do run into any technical hiccups along the way. We will be keeping a recording of today's webinar on NAPSA's Facebook page and on our YouTube channel, so you'll be able to watch it again or share it with others afterwards. And if you'd like to stay connected with NAPSA and hear about our upcoming webinars, you can sign up for our email list at primatesanctuaries.org. You can follow us on social media. We're Primate Sanctuary on Facebook and NAPSA Primates on Instagram, or subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss any future webinars. And I'll be sure to drop all these links in the chat during the webinar so that you have them. Today, I am very pleased to welcome Debbie Metzler, primatologist and managing director of captive wildlife at the PETA Foundation. Debbie also serves on NAPSA's Council of Professionals. Debbie has extensive experience working with the media on issues involving animals in captivity, and today she'll be sharing tips and strategies for sanctuaries preparing for media interviews. Communicating effectively with journalists can make a big difference in how stories about primates and the work sanctuaries do are understood by the public. So we're really grateful to have Debbie here to share her expertise with us. And as Debbie speaks, please feel free to post questions in the chat. We'll have time for Q&A at the end of the hour, and we'll try to get to as many of your questions as possible. So with that, thank you so much for being here, Debbie, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Andy. That's a very great introduction. I'm going to go ahead and put my slides up and yep. All right, here we go. So as Andy mentioned, I serve on NAPSA's Council of Professionals. I am a primatologist, and my experience in primate behavior began working with signing chimpanzees, and I got my master's degree doing that. And a couple of those chimpanzees are still living at the Fauna Foundation in Canada, which is a NAPSA member sanctuary. I also worked at another NAPSA member sanctuary, Chimpanzee Sanctuary Northwest, also in Washington State. And that sanctuary has an advocacy wing. And in that position, I really fostered a passion for advocacy. And in our main goal in that program at that time was to end the use of chimpanzees in Hollywood. And I worked really closely a lot with PETA and also with accredited zoos and other sanctuaries, kind of working together on this issue. And it became, what I realized I wanted to do more of that, and I wanted to do more big picture work. So I did transition to a position at the PETA Foundation in the Captive Animal Law Enforcement Division. And I continued that work, and I'm really proud to say that we have ended the use of chimpanzees in Hollywood, and it was thanks to all of those groups working together on this. And in my new role, I use many approaches to be really effective at putting an end to the use of wild animals in any form of entertainment. And that's our major focus in my department. We use legal cases, regulatory pressure, online marketing campaigns, and then also traditional media. And that pushes our mission forward. And in that role, I have done over 100 media interviews. I went through records to tally up for this presentation and was impressed to see that it was really that many. And so I have gained a lot of experience and learned, what to do, what not to do. And so I want to be able to share with you what I've learned in my experience and prepare your teams for what you can expect when reporters request to speak with you. So first off, just kind of, it's important to understand what reporters need when they're coming to you. Reporters are trying to answer the 5 W's of journalism, which is who, what, where, when, and why. So that's something to keep in mind, that those are the answers they're trying to get from you, and they will distill the facts of their story to take key takeaways for their target audience. And they're coming to you because they need your expertise to explain the issue to their readers, their viewers, their listeners. And so it's really important to keep that in mind. You are the expert. And this is an opportunity for you to get your word out, not just answer the questions from the reporters. Depending on the platform they're using, which I'll discuss some of those differences in just a bit, but reporters are almost always looking for a soundbite. And that's something that is important to remember, because they don't always come right out and say, I need, 2 sentences on this. But that is what they're looking for most of the time. So it is really good to be prepared to give an answer that is succinct and standalone. And that is what a soundbite is. It's a prepared standalone talking point that is usually about 2 to 3 sentences. And you should put together a few of these ahead of time. Anytime you get a media request, even if it's super short notice, just take 10 minutes to jot down a few things. It doesn't, have to be fully written out. At least just a few keywords or key things that you want to make sure you get across, and it helps you stay on topic during the interview. So when you're drafting those sound bites, a couple things to keep in mind is that the reporter's first question is usually to ask you to explain what's going on. And that's especially going to be the case if you've put out a press release. They're going to say, okay, can you tell me what this is about? If they're coming to you, because they are working on another story and they want your expertise, it may be a little bit more of a targeted question, but the underlying reasoning is still there. They need you to just explain the issue. They are naive to what's going on, and so they need you to tell them what it's about. So when you're coming up with sound bites, that's always good to kind of imagine what your first answer is going to be to explain what's going on. And then also ask yourself, what do you want to share with the media about this subject? And keep that in mind as you're drafting those sound bites. And then the other question that is almost guaranteed that they will ask is there anything else? And so it's always good to also have a last point that you want to make. And honestly, sometimes you can just sort of repeat something you've already said, but you should always have something ready to go to end on. And oftentimes that will be what is included, because that's the last thing they heard. So it's important for that to be a really strong talking point and to another way to get your mission across. Also, the other thing that I like to do in just preparing for interviews is anticipate questions that they might ask you that seem common sense to us. But again, reporters are really naive to all of this subject matter, and they're unfamiliar with your work, with the situation, and they may not even know the difference between monkeys and apes. So it's good to have prepared, succinct answers to just provide brief educational info. Even if it's not on the exact topic that you're discussing, because sometimes, they're talking to a primate expert and they might just kind of ask you a side question. But you want to be able to get back on subject as quickly as you can. And so it's good to have something sort of prepared to answer those seemingly off topic, but more like logistical questions that they might have, so that you can pivot back to the subject of the interview. And then remember that everything you say is on the record. Even if they say, okay, off the record, it's still on the record. Everything you say, even if they're not recording it, if you're saying it to them, consider it on the record. So there's a lot of times where, you might have a reason to put out a press release, and so you're seeking media, but there's also going to be situations in which you're asked for comments on just stuff that's happening in breaking news stories, just what's going on in the world. And the media is more and more really fast paced, and they really want an answer quick. Sometimes because of that, people have to decline an interview. They're just not ready to do it. So knowing kind of what these common media scenarios can be will help you be able to answer those responses quickly, and then of course get your mission and your issue in front of the audience that is coming to you. So it could be a local TV station, which is good for your local audience to see. It could even be the New York Times, which would be so amazing to get your quote into the New York Times, to circle back to your work and raise awareness. And so even if it seems like out of your wheelhouse, like maybe you are chimpanzee sanctuary, you might still get asked about monkey issues because it's just a hot topic in the media. So these are things that absolutely will attract media attention. I can guarantee there's always media attention about these subjects. It could be why a reporter is reaching out to you. Specifically, they want a soundbite about something that's breaking news, or it could be that you're talking about something else, but this is going on in the world, and so they might ask you about it. Escaped primates is probably the number one media hyped issue that involving primates they always want to discuss when there's escapes. Viral stories, of course, also can just spread like wildfire, and everyone wants to talk about it. I put a little graphic here of Punch because that story went so viral, to the point that when I searched the internet for monkey graphic, there were 4 on the very front page of Punch. So he was, his story just really went very viral. So I imagine a lot of primatologists and sanctuaries probably did get some questions about that. Recent rescues is also one. Again, that might be something that you are trying to get attention about. But it might be that there's even just a legal case or a rescue case that's unrelated to your sanctuary, but has been in the media. And it may even honestly not even be all primates, a facility that had all primates. It might be a mix of animals. But if it's been in the media, if it's getting attention, it's good to kind of expect that there might be some questions about that. The other thing is protests. So like if you have a laboratory in your region and it's been getting a lot of protests, they might ask you about that. And also wildlife trafficking is another hot topic, and it's happening more and more in the media, which is good. It needs attention. And then the last thing is there might be some news about wild primates, or even primatologists, notable primatologists who have recently passed away or something like that, they might ask you about. So you just want to kind of have that in the back of your mind and be ready to accept those interview requests when they come in. So I mentioned earlier that when you're preparing sound bites, you kind of want to think about the different platform that you might be speaking with. And so this is just to go over the differences in how you want to prepare for each of these platforms. So TV stations, especially like local TV stations, they may talk to you for 10 to 20 minutes usually, but then they're only going to use 10 seconds of what you say. So that's when it's especially important to have prepared standalone talking points or sound bites prepared, because every single word you say can be singled out. And this is usually done over video conferencing. It could be a phone call that they record and play on the air, or it could even be an on-camera in-person interview, but most of the time it's video conferencing. And then there's also very, infrequently, but there might be more live on-air interviews on like cable news. But most of the time, this is going to be a pre-recorded interview that then they take just a few seconds of. And then print, usually those interviews are done over the phone. I have had a couple times where, even though it's been for a print outlet, they prefer to just meet over Zoom. But most of the time it's over the phone, and it might be pretty quick. They might just want a quick soundbite and that's it. So probably a 5-minute call, but other times they'll talk to you for a lot longer. And I've found that the print interviews usually are a bit longer than TV interviews. So I put an estimate of, 5 to 30 minutes for those kinds of interviews. But again, just like a TV interview, they might only use one sentence of what you say. So it's really important to remember that every word you say can be singled out. An advantage of print interviews is that you can have the sound bites right in front of you and you can, try not to sound like you're reading, but you can have them there to read. It's a lot harder to do that when it's over video conferencing, but there's still ways to have some of your keywords up on your screen or something like that so that you can make sure you get those points across. Podcasts, they may talk to you for 15 to 60 minutes, and they actually will use the whole thing. So you should still have talking points ready to make sure you don't forget to say what you want to share, but it's going to be a lot more of a conversation. So rather than, a question, a quick answer, and, the typical, what is this about? Do you have anything you want to say? That structure isn't going to be there as much with a podcast. It's going to be much more casual, a longer conversation, and it gives you a chance to put a lot more context to the topic at hand. A lot of times it's over the phone, but it depends on the medium that they're using because more and more podcasts are occurring online. So that also might be over video conferencing. And then last is radio, and this is usually done on the phone. And depending on the show or the outlet, it actually could go either way, where it's pre-recorded and they only use 1 or 2 sound bites, or it could be a live on-air conversation. So it'd be more like a podcast. So it just depends on the outlet. And as you learn what outlet you're going to be interviewing with, it is good to know your interviewer and their audience. It might be able to help you, better prepare for the kinds of things you want to say. So if you have the time, because some of these requests come in with very short notice, but if you do have the time prior to your interview, it's good to try and research the reporter and the media outlet just a little bit, and do that by watching or reading or listening to their previous interviews. And that way you can get a sense of their style, how they treat their guests, the tone of their stories, that sort of thing. And then also, if you're able to look at the media outlet's audience, that'll help you maybe adjust how you plan to answer questions, because is it primarily young people under 25, or is their audience mostly people over 50? Is it a majority of conservative or progressive? These different demographics will help you sort of plan how to approach the interview. And then tips for video conferencing. Many people watch the news on their phone and with the sound off. So it's really important to remember that appearance is key. You want to look nice, you want to be dressed nice, and avoid really bright colors or really flashy patterns, because that can be distracting. And you also, in that same vein, you want to have a nice background that is relatively simple, but isn't just a blank wall. And you don't want to have clutter or anything that's super distracting in the background either. It also might be worth investing in a ring light, because it does help with the lighting. And you want to make sure that the camera, your computer camera or your laptop, is propped up in a way that properly frames you for the video conferencing. So that's usually the shoulders and above. And then the last thing that's really hard to do and to remember is to have eye contact with the camera, not your own image or even the other person, because then your gaze will be looking down. And it's a little distracting when watching that story. So if you're just looking down and because you're looking at the other person, You can see I'm trying to demonstrate. It's just not as great as looking up at the camera. So then probably the most important part of accepting these interview requests is to be able to find an opportunity to share your mission. Come to that interview prepared to communicate your message, no matter what the topic is that prompted the call. You are the expert, remember that. So they're coming to you for input. You should drive the narrative and really see this as an educational opportunity. You might even be able to put in a call to action if that's appropriate. But you do want to choose one thing to convey regardless of what you were asked. Keep it simple and focused. And I mentioned this earlier, but it's okay to repeat that message in response to multiple questions even. And that increases the likelihood that that message you're trying to get across will actually be included in the coverage. And then it's unlikely in this field, especially, that you'll be asked something super off topic. Again, they're coming to you for a very specific, narrow reason. But you should still be prepared for tough questions. So reporters aren't usually trying to propose a gotcha type question unless it's an outlet that's specifically framed that way. Most of the time it's not. So they're usually not trying to like catch you off guard, but they might ask questions that are tough to answer. Something that might be from like the other perspective that they genuinely are curious about. And it's, it's not that they're trying to be accusatory. But for instance, if you've recently rescued a former pet primate, they may genuinely feel like, well, how does your sanctuary respond to how you've taken this former family member? They might frame it that way from someone. How do you feel about that? And it could catch you off guard a bit, because that's not the perspective we look at as it. We see it as, this is obviously a rescue and this is a much better environment for this animal. But if you're asked that, because that's the perspective of a lot of people, maybe they aren't familiar with the issues. So it may be a genuine, misunderstanding. So it's just important to be able to respond to those questions with sensitivity, but also, of course, getting your mission and purpose across. One thing I like to do, even though I've never, luckily, fingers crossed, I've never actually had to be the subject of a hostile interview. That's going to be more like those side-by-side cable news interviews that are live, and they're kind of designed to derail the dialogue. So we call that a hostile interview. I watch those. I study them because I think it's really important to see how these very skilled spokespeople pivot what they're saying back to their message. And so even though I have done over 100 interviews, I still watch every single interview that everyone in my organization does. I watch them, I learn from them. And especially these hostile interviews, I find it really helpful to see how it is that people can pivot back to the message. And then you can take that information and apply it to a scenario you might be put in, even if it's not hostile. So that's really what I had. And I'm ready for questions, and hopefully I can answer them.
Thank you so much, Debbie. That was fantastic and helpful for me as well. I really appreciate your perspective on approaching these interviews. And if anyone has questions, please do type them in the chat, and we'll get to as many as we can. I have a question just to start us off. I love your recommendation for studying hostile interviews, because even if you aren't put in a position where you're, in a hostile interview, it can still, when you have to pivot quickly, it's kind of similar in a way, even if it's not like someone aggressively, grilling you. So I was wondering if you have any resources or like more specific recommendations. I know you just said like watching every single interview, from your organization, which I think is a great idea, but maybe for people in smaller organizations, do you have any suggestions for how they might go about studying hostile interviews?
That's a good question. I mean, the thing that comes to mind is probably Fox News. That's going to be where you'll see more of that kind of banter. But there's also some morning shows, and there's one across the pond. I can't remember the name of it, but it's in I think it's based in London. That they'll bring guests into their studio even, and bring up a hot topic that's getting a debate. CNN might have something like that too. These more debate style interviews where they will bring in someone who has an opposing viewpoint from everyone else in the room. And so it can get kind of hostile, but it's really interesting to see how people will try to get back on message, which, like you said, even if it's not hostile, things can derail pretty quickly, especially if they start asking questions about something unrelated to why they called you in the first place. So it's just really good to keep in mind, like, okay, well, that's actually not what we're here to talk about. I really want to get back on topic.
Right. That's great. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Another question, how would you deal with a reporter that prints or shares just entirely wrong information or entirely wrong facts? How would you approach that?
It definitely depends on how egregious that is, but it is appropriate to contact the reporter and ask for a correction. Whether or not they make it is, a toss up, but more often than not, they will at least consider a correction if they agree with you that, it was framed incorrectly.
Right. So have you had media approach like volunteers or staff who are not media savvy and they end up are quoted as like a spokesperson? How do you help those individuals learn to redirect media?
That's a good question. So PETA does do a lot of protests, and we, have people who aren't necessarily trained spokespeople, but are attending these protests. And a lot of times reporters do want to talk to those individuals who've shown up. And so there are some resources that PETA includes in preparing for protests, and so they do have kind of some standard sound bites that people can look at. But in general, sometimes you just kind of have to hope that they don't say anything that will come off poorly or be in conflict with what you've been saying. And then, if something like that does happen, or even if they do well, it can be good to touch base with them and be like, hey, if this happens again, let's practice ahead of time. And it's a good idea. You did fine, but like, let's be prepared because it might happen again.
Right.
And before I started this role, there was one time when I answered the phone at CHCI, which was the Chimpanzee and Human Communication Institute. I was the one who answered the phone, and I think I must have missed them identifying themselves as a reporter. But there was something that, was in the news or had recently happened that they just started asking questions about, and I answered them. And then later found out that it was a student reporter, so it was for the student paper, but I was like quoted in the student paper, and I was like, what? I did not realize
it can happen sometimes,
Yeah. So always good to, even anytime you're talking to the public, just be prepared for them to, even if it's not a media outlet, they might take what they heard from you and put it on social media. So it's just always good to be thoughtful of that when you're talking to any public member, that what you say could be requoted somewhere.
Right. And it's good practice to frame it that way in your mind too, right? Because anytime you're addressing the public, you're treating it like that and learning from it, right?
Yeah.
So we do have a question on YouTube from Fish Dreams Blue Beach. Have you seen a shift in how the media approaches sanctuaries and issues involving primates?
I think that there's more of a distinction between respected and accredited sanctuaries, and I think the media is learning that there's a difference between places that call themselves a sanctuary, but definitely are not a sanctuary because they don't have the don't follow the same guidelines, principles, philosophies, and they may even be doing abusive practices with these animals. And I think there's still a lot of misinformation about that. There's still a lot of reporters who get it wrong. But I do feel like there's been a shift, and that's something that, you can, even if you see a story in your local news station or local paper that is, kind of like a fluff piece or glorifying a facility you happen to know is absolutely not a true sanctuary, you can write to them, you can ask for equal coverage, you can say, I'd like to come on and talk about this. If it's a paper, you can submit an op-ed or a letter to the editor. And I think the more that kind of thing is done, the greater the likelihood is that they will start seeing the difference more clearly.
Right. And, just to give my own perspective as well, I've noticed at least some degree of a shift in the media kind of literacy and reporting on primates and entertainment as Hollywood has reduced that more and more over time. I have seen a little bit of a shift in an understanding about primates in that regard, which is nice. It's still a lot of work to do, but I think improvements in Hollywood have kind of been mirrored in media, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And along those same lines, because there's been more like documentaries or publicity on some of these subjects, like chimp crazy, that
Right.
does get not just the public thinking of things differently, but also the reporters and people in the media that are looking into these subjects and looking at the legal cases and seeing how just there's been a paradigm shift, and it's continuing. There's still lots of work to do. But I do
Right.
think there's been a shift in how reporters look at scenarios, and they're not necessarily falling into the trap of, oh, these are animals who are treasured and belong in the with their families. They're like, the human home is not the best place for a chimpanzee.
Right. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So we have a comment from Patty Reagan. Hi, Patty.
Hi,
Patty
Patty.
Hi. Patty is the founder and director of Center for Great Apes in Florida, which is a NAPSA member sanctuary. Patty said, we've had lots of interview requests from British gossip papers. No matter what you say to carefully state facts, they change it. When you don't reply to requests due to their reputation and history with you, they still make up the interviews or say you refuse to answer. And she said, I also, and then later she said she also sees a difference in their approach about stories. I think when we were talking about a little bit more media literacy, but yeah, I'll let you respond to Patty's comment if you have anything to add to it.
There's definitely outlets that, and that's why, to one of the points I made about like knowing the audience, knowing the outlet, there are going to be outlets that they are a tabloid and they're looking for a shocking headline. I'll give you a really good example of this. TMZ reached out once to ask about Taylor Swift going to a zoo in Australia. PETA does take opportunities to respond to media requests, and we simply gave a statement that was something about how next time Taylor should go to a sanctuary. It was pretty tame. And TMZ spun it as PETA slams Taylor Swift for visiting, and then that just took off. And I was like, the Swifties are going to come for me. It was attributed to me. So it definitely can go in that direction. It can backfire and makes you think, ooh, maybe we should not have gone that direction. We should have just declined to comment. I think it can be, you have to feel it out. It can be appropriate to decline to comment, or just, say we don't have anything to say on this. And the part about, maybe them misframing that or even making things up entirely is, I think, more and more of an issue with AI. I actually, one time, I'm not trying to sound vain, but I do have a Google alert for my name. But it's because I do get quoted in the media, and I want to see what they're saying. And so I got a Google alert for my name, and I hadn't done an interview recently, so I was curious what it was, and I read it and I was like, I don't remember this interview. Like, how long ago was this? And I was trying to figure it out, and it had a quote from me that there was nothing wrong with it. It was, it was fine, but I was just like, I do not have any like recollection of this. And so then I actually ran the whole page through an AI checker. The entire thing was AI, but it had quoted me and it had my title and
Wow.
affiliation. And that really scared me a bit
That
because
is very
I was
interesting.
like, wow, they've completely made up this entire quote that, you know, is is just totally made up, but it's attributed to me and has my affiliation. So it's definitely something that I think is unfortunately possibly going to happen more, and we just have to
Mhm.
keep an eye out for it. And again, there are opportunities to ask for corrections or to send in an op-ed or something like that. It is,
Mhm.
once it's out there, it's going to be hard to dial it back. So yeah, I guess I don't have a great advice on that, but I have
Yeah.
sympathy.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think more and more we're all becoming more aware that we're kind of in a new era with AI. And, I haven't heard about something like that happening within the animal welfare world. And that's really, really important to know and be aware of and keep an eye out for. And I think also just with like the AI kind of fake rescue videos that are just entirely unreal, but look very realistic. You can make AI videos on certain apps and it can be anything, anything
Yeah.
you can imagine. So I think these kind of issues will be popping up more and more in the coming years. It'll be very interesting to see how the world reacts to that, including in media. I did want to say we got another comment from Fish Dreams Blue Beach. She said, "This is Rochelle Hansen from Storybook Farm Primate Sanctuary in Canada." So I wanted to say hello. Thank you so much for joining us. Um, Erin Zamzow from Chimpanzee Sanctuary Northwest said hello. Hi,
Hi, Erin.
Erin. Also, another question. Most media request photos or video from us, but some insist on taking their own, which are not always flattering to the facility. What are the
Mm,
pros and cons of refusing to let them take their own images?
that's a really good question. Yeah,
Very good
because
question.
they might not they'll take things out of context, and I
Hmm.
think that can be more damaging. And so yeah, again, it's like, are they gonna make you look bad if they say they refuse to let us in? I think it's just a risk you have to take, but I would probably push toward, we have a strict photo policy. You can even say like we don't let people come in. We're not open to the public. Um, or if you do have public visits, they're from a distance. If you want a real close up photo, we have to. That's something that our staff can take and provide for you.
Right.
And I think just maybe pushing that and saying we just don't allow, it's just a policy. Then that way they're not put off by saying like, oh, they didn't want to let us in, but it's just the policy.
Right. Something I have done in the past when I work directly in a sanctuary, I would kind of work with our media person to share the IUCN photo guidelines for imagery with great apes to help them understand why we wanted photos taken in a certain way.
Yes.
Um, and we found that to be helpful to share that in advance with reporters. So something to consider as well.
That's excellent. Yeah, because again, things taken out of context can be more damaging than, not just to your facility, but even to the people's perception of primates in captivity in general.
Right. And for anyone who is not aware of the IUCN photo guidelines for imagery with great apes, or I think it's primates, not just great apes. You can find that online. IUCN is the conservation body that determines threatened status for species in the wild. So whether they're extinct or endangered, critically endangered, not threatened. And it's just a set of guidelines that, again, is easily accessible online and, covers things like showing humans at an appropriate distance, showing a barrier between humans and primates, which especially can be, important for sanctuaries and range countries where they're taking in orphans and they have to, for example, hold them, like bottle feed them. But that kind of imagery can be very misleading without context. It can make it look like they're pets. So it has those kinds of guidelines to help reduce that kind of confusion. But it's also very relevant for U.S. sanctuaries as well. So that could be helpful. And I think we have one more question. Is there a media outlet you haven't been involved with that is on your wish list? That's a good one.
That is good. Well, it's funny because I've done some interviews with outlets where I was like really looking forward to having it come out because it was a big outlet and then it just never did, which is something that happens. Yeah. I did have an interview with the New York Times once and they never published it. So that would be, I would love to, I can't believe I'm hearing myself say that I would love to do an interview with anybody, but because when I first started it honestly was a very stressful experience for me. And I think it is for everyone starting out. There's a lot of anxiety behind, the fact that they might only use a few seconds of what you say. I came from an environment where, we would give educational tours of the chimpanzee sanctuary, especially the one where they used sign language. We had a whole observation area. But you have 30 minutes to talk to people. And then, answering questions, you can go on for a little bit. There's more context. And it really gave me a lot of anxiety knowing that even if I talk to them for half an hour, they're only going to use 10 seconds of what I say. But I've gotten beyond that. I've gotten over it. And, for fear of using a cliche, the more you do it, the easier it gets.
It's true. It's very true. And, as much as I can't believe I'm even recommending this, but role playing with your coworkers, I know it sounds horrible, but it actually is so helpful. At a former organization I worked at, I became a media spokesperson and I had to do a mock interview with gotcha questions. And it really does help. So if you have, communications staff that is willing to, help you with that kind of thing, it can be really useful. But I know it might sound awful. I used to think it sounded awful too, but I learned so much from it.
Well, and I feel like if you can answer questions in front of someone knows the answer, that's harder to do, in my opinion, than doing it for a reporter that doesn't know anything about the issue. So if you can get through that practice, then you can do anything.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I don't see any more questions. So I think we can wrap it up. Thank you so much, Debbie. This has been amazing and so helpful. And like I said at the beginning, this webinar will live on our Facebook account and on YouTube. We're really excited to be doing these on YouTube now. And it's just more accessible for people who might not be on social media. And if you enjoyed this, please do share it with the people you work with people who are preparing for media interviews. So thank you again, Debbie, and we'll see you soon.
Okay, thanks for having me.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.